I'll blow that up a little bit more. He makes a point to show you one of those ventricles going into the center, like, yo, this is
Definitely
cable
allows
work.
us to continuously
bio cable
keep
work.
opening up the space and
Got one
allow
connection
others to
from-
feel comfortable with discussing whatever they're experiencing, because that's really what tribe is all about. And with semen retention, the only thing I could speak towards this directly is that obviously the consciousness knows more about what's happening than sometimes the subconscious knows more about what's happening than the conscious. And what was talked about in Ayurveda was very similar to how there are parts of our body that do need to drain from time to time, that even the actual reproductive system for the male and the semen retention, that there were times in which it would drain itself. And this is almost like how all the organs work, is that they have to drain themselves from time to time. And what you find is that the actual fluids, as I was talking about the OG semen, that was the joke I gave, but the actual semens that actually become more cultivated and actually don't die off in the process of the cultivation move further up into areas where they're actually no longer able to be ejected from the lower channel. And so this sometimes appears as a bulge in the top part of the navel. Sometimes a person doesn't have that necessarily. Also, sometimes there's a pain in this inner area until that, let's say it's a tube, until that tube opens back up to allow the semen to actually be able to go back up that channel. And actually where that pain actually starts is in the lower back, like right where you find that kind of like that hole where your tail would be, which they say is like the entry point somewhat to the root chakra, that area will actually be sensitive to the touch, because the semen is actually accumulating back there, still pushing at that valve, if you may, in order to gain access into the dantain. And so I would just say stick with it, brother. Like, the reality is that all the experiences that you're having are normal, because obviously the body will know how to regulate its channels. Because for us, because this is the thing, every time you go like hiking or anything that builds up a lot of breath, like if you play, like football players have to deal with this. This is what they call testosterone. This is what they're talking about. So anything that you start doing, even if I'm lifting weights, if I'm breathing like, and I'm like running and all this kind of stuff, I'm far more sexual after that than I would be before then. And it's because all of that, all those liquids, all those fluids and everything is like, it's primed. And now, though, if another way to actually pass that essence into something else is through creation, is actually through having something that you're specifically doing, that you're pouring that creative force actually into. And how it passes from one channel to another, like whether it ends up coming out in what you're saying is a wet dream, or whether it ends up transcending into another area. There has been times where you can even, since we're getting personal about this, that you'll think that you actually had an orgasm or actually ejaculation, but there won't be anything there, but you can actually even feel that it's there. And I'll make that very clear that, hey, I can't explain this yet, but a male can ejaculate and there had been nothing that came out, like physically, but you can feel that there's actually something that is there. It's like the energy itself was ejaculated, but not the actual, the physical fluid itself. I just wanted to make sure we cover this entire
because
subject.
That's exactly what was happening to me. Yeah, because that was exactly what was happening. It's like it's that there's something there, but it's not actually happening.
Yeah, and what they say is that, again, planets are merging at this stage, so stay tuned for next week and what more it reveals. But that basically that this is the foreground to the Immaculate, which is the golden lotus. So it's basically that in this same vein of knowledge that talks about the seminal retention, it actually talks about what the goal of this is. And these books, you know, when you see my book thing, like, it's a lot. Like, I have to figure out how to get that back online and not go to jail trying to do it. But maybe we could put it in like a private library. But there's one book that speaks deep about this. It's like an old Chinese book. And what they're basically saying, you know, once you get the gist of what's being talked about, is that the last stage of this Buddhahood, but not necessarily the Buddha that they write about right now, but the art of the Buddha, is that the Buddha starts replicating itself to where it becomes completely surrounded by golden versions of itself. And that what these golden versions are is that, and I'm glad we got into this conversation, because it allows me to tie things up really like I wanted to in this conversation, because this had to be a deep dive. So let me just give it to you like how it really is, and no philosophies at all. So there is like an energy, a feminine force that is on the planet that is actually more corresponds to wet dreams, okay? And this has always been seen as more or less the Lilithian force, which has been known in occultism to steal children. And many took that a little too far with actually thinking that it had to do with her physically stealing children out of a crib that were born. But it was actually directly related to that she would impregnate herself from the semen of men's wet dreams, okay? And this was very known about. This was like, you know, if you was going back in the old days, everybody knew that this was going on. And there were things that you would do from time to time in order to try to keep this from happening. And I don't want to get into that so much, because then it's like getting one thing versus the other. I just want to talk about the overall benefits of when one could get beyond this stage of self. Because what they do say, though, is what attracts her is things like pornography, things that like basically put you into that aspect of yourself until you graduate. It's literally like something that you graduate. And then even pornography and naked pictures and all sorts of stuff don't bring that force back into being able to have that kind of activity, right? But all this is like, let's say, a ladder. So let me just lay it dry. So what happens is that, or wet in this case. So what happens is that, so this energy is said to create children from this energy. And she has like these kids from pretty much every man that has had these ejaculations. And that priests were always trying to prevent this from happening to them, because they were like the ones that she was going after the most, because they were the ones that were the most sexually oppressed, if you may, and had the most semen cultivated, right? So then Solomon was the only one, and Solomon in this case being a cognate in itself, some kind of code or program from a large bank of knowledge and memories that have been long forgotten. But Solomon cracks this in the Song of Solomon by explaining that there's also another bride, that once one can overcome the first force, which I used to actually see in the dream, like when I was lucid, and I would go into every dream lucid for a while, as I explained before, that this being would appear first. And she was always like the best looking chick that you can think of, dressed in the best seductive clothes that you can think of. And everything was just overwhelming about her energy as far as seduction. And I had a choice. Either I could go with her and have the greatest time you could ever think of, because it's also in the astral plane, or I could go to door number 2, and I would never know what was behind door number 2. So it was literally saying, when I cracked this in my mind, because you got to realize a lot of this stuff is happening in your mind, and it's disguising itself as images and pictures and all this kind of stuff. But really, it's a function of the consciousness that is trying to get you to understand about yourself, that you could take the one where you already know what's going to happen. That's really how it was presented. You already know what's going to happen. You're going to go with her. You're going to have this great time. You're going to ejaculate. Then it's going to be over. Or you can go behind this other door and you don't even know what's going to happen in there. Mystical stuff happens in there. But you have to have the willpower to go to the door that you don't know what's going to happen. And this was always taking place in the onset of my lucid dreams. I actually couldn't get completely lucid, which I would call breaking the dream. I couldn't get completely lucid until I would have to make that choice. And this was just me personally. I don't think everyone goes through this, but I think a lot of us probably do. And so spiritual wisdom revealed that, so in the Song of Solomon, he's writing to this other force. And this other force was known as basically the Shekinah, was known as Sophia, was known as the bride, was known as the virgin. She was more of chaste and pious. So this particular being would never come to a man that had lascivious ideas and had like women, lots of women and things that he was engaged with. And this woman was known as wisdom. Now that's why this knowledge is kind of multi-layered, because even in one context, it's saying that wisdom never really finds itself in the mind of a man who is still thinking of the vulgarities of everything, right? But then also it's saying that you also have to kind of go through this courtship process of being able to get wisdom to now rest on you like a dove. This is basically the Venusian initiation. That's why I find this is all strange that it's coming up at this point. So in this case, that many would tarry, meaning that they would actually go for prolonged periods of fasts, whatever those kind of fasts were, in order to receive this Holy Ghost, which was the bride. And in this tarrying process, the only thing that you really practiced was an aesthetic of purifying yourself, just purifying the consciousness, purifying the mind. And that in this stage of continuous purity, that she would become more and more attracted to you. And again, this could be seen in different levels. She would become more and more attracted until she allowed you to take her on as a bride. And then once that happened, you would gain this consciousness that, and I can speak from experience, that always shows up. Like at its most prevalent at around 3 a.m. And it's all wise. It just knows everything about everything and just keeps talking about every single thing that you need to know. And it never forsakes you. And this is interesting because it talks about, again, as it calls it, the counselor, and it says that the counselor will never forsake you. And so what it's basically saying is that once you get to a certain stage of leveling up in your consciousness and realizing, you know, how you're entreating certain things and energies with your body, and then you seek to actually, you know, get really into a relationship with wisdom, once it rests on you, it never leaves. Just like in a real relationship with a real bride, no matter what you went through or did or happened after that, that wisdom and knowledge will always be with you. And it was always seen as an achievement that every man should try to go for in their life in order to obtain this bride. And that was the Song of Solomon. That's the decryption of what the Song of Solomon is actually all about. So in conclusion, I think that we're getting a little bit deeper here. So Patty's question. So what happens when this is going on with a woman? What we have to learn in all of this is that the human body is actually androgynous. So the same thing that is happening for the male, even if it's like flipped inside out, is also happening for the female. So I would assume for sure that there is just like there's a Abraham and there's a Saraswati. There's also, let's say, the Sophia, and then there's the masculine aspect of what Sophia would be. So these divine virtues, if you may, are in themselves achievements that like can be reached if one chooses to take certain paths. Now, I think the wrong thing to do here would be to insist that everyone has to do this. But the best thing that we could attain from this is knowing that it's like one of those things that's like a vase on the shelf that's glowing and sparkling. If one can go through the proper sequences in order to achieve it, then they would have a great reward. And you yourself, you're actually on that path. And you've already seen the benefits. You've also seen the other side of it. You've seen what happens when you continuously would pour forth your essence without restraint, right? And you see how also, because this is what they're saying also that you should learn, and these are metaphors about the Lilithian force, which is that it will drain completely. It will basically kill you. Like it will keep trying to drink, also like somewhat of a vampire or a night hag. And I'm sure people give these kind of titles and names around it because it can get that serious. So they're going to try to paint the biggest, wraith, this is a wraith that's draining all your energy. And that's really happening, but it's also a part of lessons and powers and energies that we're to come to realize these are the sequences of life. So that way, when our son comes to us and says, well, Dad, this is what's happening to me, wherever lesson he chooses or whatever path he chooses to go, basically whatever womb he chooses to be with at that stage, he's not unaware of what exactly is going on. So that way, when he reaches that drain point, like, okay, I can't sleep with Celine anymore, I need to wake up to Isis or whatever they call it, that one knows what that actually is and knows what actions to make. It's like, okay, now I gotta back off of this kind of life. It's just like my father said. And that's what we're really looking to restore here, is not removing our children. And I remember this very clearly, and it's not basically removing the possibilities of this even happening, because I don't think that that's really what you want to do. I think what you want to do, though, is put the proper tutorials around it. So that way, when stuff starts happening, there's a greater level of clarity of what is causing that and how to move on from it. And so I would for sure say that now is the greatest time for you, because you're standing in the face of your resolve. And just like any man that actually would be a bit more weaker against seduction, because seduction is a very powerful force. They talk about seduction on the spiritual plane and how it's overcome many. But really, instead of seeing it as like a biblical straitjacket, more of seeing it as things that you need to understand how to configure in your consciousness, and that these are the characters that are being used in order to get you to become aware of that. Because then when you become aware of that, you gain a power. That's one of the siddhas. So you gain this power, and you've gained that power through the real lessons and experiences that it takes for you to actually become aware of what's going on and what you're doing. And that's exactly what we talked about the other day, and actually a few times since we've had the last conversations about our gifts, and that we never truly know how to use our gifts until we're put into a situation where we don't have them. And now we have to learn step by step, like even with the semen itself, how precious the semen really is. I'm sure you're going to realize more and more of the different things that can actually be done with it. Obviously, it seems to even function somewhat as a bargaining chip. Sometimes men that actually have been able to cultivate more of their spiritual force seem to attract other essences around them. And in that form of attraction, and this is, of course, now you're seeing even a male aspect acting out in its female stage, but even in that attraction goes into a courtship. So this is like the male playing hard to get with its energy in order to attract a better relationship on its feminine side. And then make no mistake, what then happens at some point, as Solomon even admitted, is that this becomes physical, like meaning that a physical person shows up that actually becomes the cognate of exactly what you've been able to achieve on the spiritual plane in that connection. Some people call that the twin flame. They call that the one that but it started in another space. And that's why some people that are trying to find the twin flame, like literally looking on apps and, going out to clubs, and it will never happen that way. It happens from within. And then once it's fully manifested within, then it comes outside. Then you see the person, and all of a sudden it hits off from there. And that's, of course, if that's in the line and the path of where one is going.
Sure. Talk us through the process of the Chrism oil then, if you could break it down step by step.
Okay, perfect. So we just discussed the Bible goes from the sacrum to the crown of the skull. And this is the Chrism oil. Now, the Chrism oil is not some theory like gravity or the Big Bang or anything else that organized society tries to tell us is the truth. The chrism oil is real. It is a sacred oil that is naturally released in human bodies from about the age of 12 onwards. And it occurs within the human body 12 times a year. And it happens, and I can provide for you, so you can provide for your listeners a link to various sites that will show them and allow them to very easily calculate. My days in December are, and Colleen, we have the same 2 days. I'm July 17, Colleen's July 18. So it's when the full moon enters into our sun sign, and we're both Cancers. So our days are coming up very soon here in December, and then we will be fasting, we will be predominantly meditating, and we'll be going in to allow this miraculous process of the chrism oil to complete its journey from on high, down to on low, and then back on high and ascend us again. So this occurs. This is scientific fact. This is real. The chrism oil is real. And it is measured, and you can measure it, and it is released within us 12 times a year. So Mark said that this is the greatest story never told, and it ties into the month of December and Christmas. How do these all tie in together? Because the chrism oil comes to us from a place at the back, near the top, not at the top, but it is at the very back of our skull, in the center, right in between the horizontal divide between the left ventricle or the left portion of our brain, the left cerebrum and the right. And at the back, there is an actual opening. And in this opening, there is right at the top of it a seat, and it's called the mercy seat. And this is where God comes to visit us on high within the human body. And there literally is a little indentation that looks like a seat where the colostrum is. And once a month, when the full moon enters into your sun sign, the colostrum releases the most precious of gifts, the gift of all gifts, and it sends it down an opening. And this opening is shaped just like a chimney. And this chimney runs from the back of the skull, the colostrum, and it goes straight into the third ventricle of the brain, this very, very center part that science acknowledges but doesn't like to talk about. And it's just staggering, because the opening for the chrism oil to get into the third ventricle is called foramen, the foramen. There's an actual opening there. Foramen. And on one side of the foramen, there is an olive. On the other side of the foramen, there is a pyramid. And I'm not making this up. I am absolutely not making this up. If you go into any Gray's Anatomy or any of the medical encyclopedias, and you go through these various terms, the foramen is in there, colostrum is in there, and you will see that on one side of the foramen, this opening where the chrism oil goes, there is an olive, and on the other side, there is the pyramid. And these are, of course, allegories within the brain. So God has so encoded everything through the concept of an allegory that it's on the Holy Land, on earth, it's in the sky, it's all written in the stars, it's in our bodies, and it's in all of these ancient texts. So the olive being a representation of the manna from heaven, and the pyramid, which is the symbol of meditation, of going within. And of course, the oil literally does go within to this deepest, darkest chamber at the very center of our brain. That's the thalamus. Once in the thalamus, the chrism oil is immediately split, one half going to the pituitary gland, the other going to the pineal. Now, why does it do this? Because that's our reality. This is who we are. We are these soulful creations experiencing life in a physical body. So we are not bodies that have a soul. We are souls that just happen to have bodies. And we're here and we're having this physical experience. To be able to have this experience, God loves us so much that he gifted us free will. Well, how do you make free will make us completely free? This is the only freedom that exists, folks. Like, this is no exaggeration.
And bringing yourself into center, bringing your eye into the center, just making an intention. They do this even in massage. To make an effort to bring stuff that may be off to one side or another, just to the center, as saying, I'm going to bring everybody in. We're all going to have a meeting together. We're all going to get together. We're all going to love each other here. Because this is going to be the most powerful point of communication. This is the center. This is not the top, because not everybody want to hike up there. We're going to make it right here at the center. So now also here's the thing, because the serpent thing is replete. Meaning that it seems like, again, the energetic potential of the spiral is always shown. Do you see this area down here? Now, it's not hard to tell that they're saying this is something serpentine, something aquatic. And as I said before, we got all of these parts from things that are even displayed separately in the ocean. George Haeckel's radiolaria, some of them, the shells that were discovered being seen in the exact patterns of the heart, the exact patterns of the pancreas, the muscles, the mollusks, all being pieces and parts of the body, and this form of the body we're using being a collaboration, a co-creation. So, but seeing in the bowels, there's also a serpent there, if you may, or a hydra. You know, there's different terms. And what this is a reference to is this is reference to your heater. Like your fuel source. Another fuel source. And you see the ventricles and things, they connect to power. Like the artist is doing his best. He's got the ventricles there, and he's showing one ventricle going right into the center. He makes a point. I'll blow that up a little bit more. He makes a point to show you one of those ventricles going into the center, like, yo, this is cable work. This is bio cable work. We got one connection from the large and small intestines going right into the center of the being to power it. This is why it's important to make sure that get some water here. I guess there it is. It's important you get a lot of water. Okay. So it just means that small intestines, large intestines, as many have seen that have gone on a cleanse, once you move out that lining of fecal matter, it makes this thing vibrate. It's very simple stuff. As more and more food and things get in here, ever since you were even born, because it's a long track, it just kind of hangs out on the walls, and then it gets like hard. And then your whole system, let's say down here, your burner, it gets like, you know how if you've used a distiller before, you start seeing all of that calcium building up all around the sides. So basically then what happens is, because this thing is like, let's say the rattler, like the rattlesnake. This thing is used to rattling, like vibrating.